Good day, everybody. This is TJ Cook, and I'm here to introduce you to Dan Hirsch and company at Engaged Prospect. What we're doing with this series, in partnership with Engaged Prospect, ABQID, powered by CNM Ingenuity, is bringing you some really great sales readiness and execution content. This is a two-part series, so 90-minute sessions times two. One is kind of getting ready for sales, and the other is kind of next level. This is a crash course in getting more sophisticated as a startup founder who has to either A, do it alone, or B, really start growing his or her team around him or her for sales. I think this is hugely relevant for New Mexico startups specifically because sales is the way, and great sales sophistication and behavior is the way you get outside of New Mexico sooner. Given that New Mexico is a very small market, we have to get smart, work smarter, not just harder, to really go national in our behavior and our mindset in terms of what we are selling. Lots of you are software-based startups. Lots of you aren't. I think this is going to be applicable to you no matter what. Some of you are B2B startups, some of you are B2C, some of you are B2B to C to C to B. You know how that goes. But I think this is just good foundational content. The other note before I hand it off to you, Dan, is I met with you twice. We talked shop. It's a slam dunk, in my opinion, in terms of the content that New Mexico startups need, and you see that reflected in how many are here today. So no pressure, but bring your A game. And I think it's going to be hugely valuable. Engaged Prospect offers an immersive paid boot camp. I believe it's 11 weeks. Correct me if I'm wrong, but for those of you who get lots of value here and then want to really equip either yourself or somebody on your growing staff, it's a pretty cool product they're offering as part of the larger thing they do, which is really great outsourced outbound sales on behalf of their clients and others. So with that, Dan, thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this as a service to our community. Really thankful and appreciative of you, and I'll turn it over.
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and good morning, everybody. So I'm gonna share my screen shortly, but it seems like we have a variety of people here, which is terrific. And I'm going to ask in advance that when it's time to share and ask questions and raise your hand or go onto the chat or just scream out, go off mute and scream, please participate. We have about an hour and 20 minutes scheduled for the rest of this call. Some of you might have to jump off earlier. And from my understanding, we actually just started the recording. So we will make sure that you get the slides and the recording after this session, and certainly would love to have you back for the second session. I'll explain the differences shortly. Harold, you were on mute, but I think a God bless you is in order. So we're going to get right into it shortly. My point is, please participate if you can. Clearly, being remote and being on a Zoom call is a little difficult, even though we're all used to it over the past 4 months. If I was in a room and walking up and down aisles and seeing you face to face, it would be quite easy to ask a question, share ideas, whatever. Let's try to do that today and see how the last 4 months has prepared us for this. Before we kick off with the discussion, I'd like to share that there is one person on this panel's the wrong word, but one person in this room that is a hybrid of kind of all things that relate us. So Tyler Mitchell, if you see his name on the screen, is actually an independent contractor with Engaged Prospect. He's a sales rep for us, helping us find new business. I'll talk a little bit more about what he does in the session, but he also goes to the University of New Mexico. He is a business owner and is starting a robotics company. And I've asked him to join to see what this session is about. And also as proof points, if you guys have questions that you'd rather someone else but myself answer, Tyler's making calls all over the country to a variety of really cool companies on behalf of us, trying to get me connected with business owners and sales leaders and so on. So thought it would be really cool, and he lives right down the road from probably some of you. So that's why he's here. Before I move on, let me share my screen. And if I could have somebody at least validate that they see the front page. We're good?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. And for clarity, just so I know, because I have 2 dogs running around, I am off camera currently, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about what it's like to get ready to sell your products and services. First, there was a great introduction of who we are, but let me give you a quick background of why I started this company. So on Saturday, this coming Saturday, we celebrate our 5th anniversary, which I think is a nice milestone. Who knows? We've gotten past the first 5-year hurdle and also hopefully a pandemic, and we're still plugging along. My background is purely sales. So sales guy forever, got out of college, sales guy, went to grad school to not be a sales guy, got out of grad school, became a sales guy, and with debt. And what I learned after that, shortly after that, was that as a professional salesperson, you are all things just like an entrepreneur. You're busy with 1,000 tasks. Your strategy and what you're doing is really important. You're helping dozens of clients at any given time, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands, depending on your companies. And sales can be really lucrative and fun. And that's what I love about it. I began this company after working for years as director of sales at an education technology firm. And the reason what I saw was that small and mid-sized companies that I had worked with in my career tended to always suffer from the resource kind of allocation challenge, which what that means to me is they might have a bunch of people, but maybe they don't have the right expertise. They don't have the right technologies. Sometimes they don't have the ability to hire people and have people solve a problem. Ultimately, with small companies for sure, and I'm going to imagine most of those on this call would shake their heads by saying, you don't have IBM or Google or Microsoft resources. You can't just go hire 25 people to do X, Y, and Z. Therefore, you have to be really creative. You have to be really good at what you do, and you have to be really focused on the right steps and best practices in order to grow your business. I saw that from an employee level kind of standpoint and wanted to start a company that could help businesses that don't have all resources that they need to most effectively get their product or service to market. That's my background. The company has been around, as I said, for 5 years. We do a lot of things. I'll probably intermix some of the things that we do as I'm telling stories, but ultimately I want you guys to leave this session with some really good practical ideas that you can go and implement. And it's possible that at the end, I might ask you, what 1 or 2 things are you going to start doing tomorrow based on what you heard today? I won't be selling what we do at all, but I might intermix some of that as sort of proof points or whatever. There's a second person that would have joined me today. His name is Sam Stein. I will leave this slide up only for a brief moment because he's not here. He just had his 4th baby. And I'm talking about challenges with dogs. Sam would have much more challenges holding a newborn, literally like 3 days old, with giving a couple slides of his own. I don't think that's fair to you guys. So he's not on it, but this is an interesting read if you would like to see it later. Okay, so before we start, by the way, I have, even though I don't have the video up and I can't see everybody's face now because I'm presenting, I do have the chat up. And anytime you have a question or a comment or would like to say something, please throw a chat out or go off mute and start talking. So here's a scenario. And this is sort of the purpose of why we're here for this session specifically. Sarah, she starts a business and she is an absolute expert in whatever it is her business does. She knows her space stone cold. She could be an engineer. She could be a consultant. She could be a former banker. She could be an educator selling ready to make educational technologies. She could be like Tyler and really know a lot about robots and manufacturing. She's a technical wizard. She doesn't often know everything there is to know about all the departments that she's in control of. And what I've found over the years is that sales is one of those that if you don't have experience in it, you've never led teams, you've never been a salesperson yourself, by no means does that disqualify you from starting a fantastic company. Look at almost every tech company out there. It was not started by a sales guy. But that's a very important function of your team. So she's ready to build this awesome company. The problem is she doesn't have funding. She doesn't have resources to go hire a sales team. What does that mean? That means that Sarah has to be the salesperson at this moment in time. And how does she get better and improve her own skill set to go get 5, 10, 15 new customers? How does she do it so that she can go back to her investors, or even if it's self-funded, she can start funding the right strategies down the road once she's built up a business? We feel at Engaged Prospect, and this probably is hard to argue because it's pretty broad, but I don't mean that rudely, but these topics are very broad. We feel that there's 5 categories that every sales team, whether it's an entrepreneur like Sarah who doesn't know sales, or it's a person like myself who's done nothing but sales his whole career, we feel that it boils down to 5 things: strategy, process, technologies, data and analytics, and then best practices. And we're going to dive into each of these as we go. Before I continue, I want to open it up to chat or conversation if anybody has a question on sort of what this topic is all about. Does anybody see themselves as Sarah? Does anybody know anybody that is like Sarah? I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts are before I continue. All right, I'm going to pick on some people here. You know what? I'll start small. Tyler Mitchell. Sorry to pick on you, man. Tell me about you 4 months ago. How did you fall in line with the example of Sarah?
Yeah. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, 4 months ago, I had no clue about sales. I didn't know the difference between inside sales and outside sales. I didn't know what a cadence was. I didn't know what a PEC was. A lot of stuff I didn't know. And I just kind of, I was looking for some more work to do, being a student over the summer. And so I decided to apply for a bunch of sales positions, and I've really learned a lot from it. So I definitely was in Sarah's shoes, where I'm going to school for engineering. So I didn't really know about the sales process.
Thank you very much. Sorry to put you on the spot. I see some other names there that I recognize. Zach, you'll be the next guy I pick on if no one else will volunteer. But the preface to all of this is entrepreneurs that start businesses oftentimes don't have the resources, knowledge, money, time, or energy to do all the things that are needed to be done. So we're going to show you how to do some of those things given limited time, resources, and money. And we're also going to talk to you about where you can kind of focus your energies. And the answer is these 5 things. So let's get right to it. So let's talk about strategy for a minute. What are the keys to a successful sales strategy? You guys have probably all heard something similar to an ideal customer profile. Ideal customer profile talks about who are your best potential buyers. If that is, if you're selling expensive foreign-made automobiles, your best customer is somebody with money, somebody who cares about status, somebody who has dispensable income and a need for a car. Oftentimes that's not somebody in Manhattan. But somebody that has money, someone that cares about what others think of them, someone that wants luxury or wants quality, that would be an ideal customer profile for someone selling expensive cars. For somebody like myself, our ideal customer profile is an organization that wants to be better at sales, whether it's them doing it themselves, it's outsourcing, whether it's calling all over the country or just one specific market, doesn't really matter. The first step is you can't tell me on the first call that you know everything about sales. You guys are 8,000% to quota and you keep growing and growing and growing and growing. That person's probably never going to hire me. And if they do, they seem like they already have it kind of under control, right? So that's not my ideal customer. What I look at when you talk about ideal customer profiles are two things. And there are many more. By the way, the preface of like all of these slides are, I want you to go after you get the slides and look these things up. We don't have, we have an hour and 15 minutes. We don't have time to dive too deep into all topics. But if you look up ideal customer profile, you'll see probably 10,000 articles that are written about it. I can boil it down into two things. Your ideal customer profile needs to be what the most profitable kind of customer is. So that could be two different ways to look at it. That could be the organization type. And what I mean by that is I'll go back to my days managing teams selling software and textbooks to schools. We sold to K-12 school districts all over the country. In fact, I've been to the University of New Mexico as part of my job at Carnegie Learning. We were doing conferences there and worked with some of the school districts in the area. I bring that up to say we thought our best customers were the largest school districts in the country. And that's because they were paying us the most money. Miami-Dade spent $3 million a year with us. Los Angeles Unified and Chicago Public Schools spent a ton of money with us. So naturally, as a sales team, we thought, okay, urban, large public school districts are our best customers. Turns out, though, that those school districts spend an awful lot of money, or I should rephrase that. They have an awful lot of turnover in their administration. So teachers come and go and administrators come and go. And the kids are always under scrutiny because certainly New York City has to perform or else it's a national crisis. Whereas, the suburban school outside of my hometown of Pittsburgh, it sort of doesn't matter. It's important that those school districts, the largest school districts, are successful. And if not, they turn over their staff pretty quickly. So what that means to a publishing company or a software company is we spent an awful lot of money and resources trying to make sure they used the materials right, they were successful. We quite literally had 2 full-time employees that lived in Miami. Our company was based in Pittsburgh. They lived in Miami. They went to Miami schools every single day of the year. And that was their full-time job, was to make sure that they used our stuff right. And that cost a lot of money. And because of it, even though it was the most revenue, it was not the most profitable account that we could possibly have. So what we did after doing a huge research study, and we used a think tank out of DC and all of these different projects to try to figure out our ideal customer from an organization standpoint, we found out that suburban, relatively well-to-do, not a lot of turnover, the kids go to school and do okay, and the majority of them go to college and everything's fine. They have support from parents. Naturally, I'm being very stereotypical, but that's true, right? Those districts were spending not a ton of money with us, but it was all profit because our support was so much less because the teachers knew how to teach what we wanted them to do. That's an example of an ideal customer profile. The type of organization, the size of organization. You might, as you're starting out, want to sell to the biggest players in your space. But those might take 2 years to close. They might not be profitable because they know you're a startup and they're going to just eat you alive on cost. Maybe it's somebody that's also growing and is relatively small too. The challenge there is naturally they might not have the resources or they can't afford your top of the line service. Other examples of organizational ideal customers would be location. Texas versus New York, United States versus Canada, international. These types of cross-sections of organizations are really important to consider. Another, oftentimes not really thought of much as ideal customer profile, is an example of the type of person at these organizations. You may have heard things like your decision maker, or the person who controls the budget, the champion, the person who's not necessarily in charge of the decision, but is the one who will get behind what you're trying to do and is going to want your product or service. Those types of ideal customers, knowing who they are, knowing what messages they resonate with, knowing how you can get a hold of them, that's all very, very important. And so I want you guys, as you think about launching your sales efforts, to think, who are your best customers and who are the people within those best customers that you can target to start having conversations? That's really important. The second part to this is figuring out the best way to get those conversations started. And that talks about sales models. Tyler, a few minutes ago, said he didn't know what inside sales versus outside sales was. There's a variety of different ways that you can conduct your sales effort. One of them is going to trade shows. One of them is having an online retail store. One of them is going and meeting with them face to face and trying to close business. One of them is calling them and emailing them and sending LinkedIn messages to try to start conversations. Poll the audience real quick. Who could tell me, or who would like to try to tell me, the difference between inside sales and outside sales?
One's done in the field and one is done pretty much all online.
That's right. Is that Xavier?
Correct.
Thank you, sir. Outside sales is done in the field. So this is people that go hospital to hospital, doctor's office to doctor's office, school to school, manufacturing firm to manufacturing firm. They sit down with the buyers. They shake hands. They end the agreement with a hug, a handshake. They sign documents together. You can build a ton of rapport and learn body language and really build relationships with people if you're face to face. Inside sales is the fastest growing discipline within the world of sales. Inside sales uses the easiest way to think of this is you're simply inside an office, right? So all of us right now are conducting inside sales. You're using email and phone, LinkedIn, other social media channels. You might be sending emails via video where you can record a greeting that you have. You're having Zoom calls and Skype calls. That's all just considered inside sales. The downside is you don't get to be face-to-face and have lunch with your customer. The positive is you can talk to a lot more prospects and customers in a given day than you could if you were driving from Albuquerque to Santa Fe or Los Angeles up to San Francisco in an airplane. There's pros and cons to both of these. So as you start to understand your ideal customer profile, the next question is, how can I get in touch with these people? Trying to call teachers on the phone is very difficult to do. Going and meeting them face-to-face at a conference is very easy to do. Working with doctors, let's say surgeons, right? Sitting in their waiting room and waiting for them to come out and visit you is a tried and true thing that medical sales professionals do, but it's very inefficient. You might wait for 3 hours to meet a doctor. You might leave and never see a doctor, but you drop off samples and you hope it gets to him or her. Sending emails, calling might not be the right way. Maybe it's conferences, maybe it's trade shows, maybe it's journals. There's a variety of ways to look at this, but really understanding who your buyer is probably the most important thing that I can share in early stage companies that don't have a ton of customers. You really have to try to do some diligence to figure that out. And then you have to figure out, how do I best get messages to them that resonate? One example, and I'm sorry I keep using education as an example, but I feel like most of us probably understand the structure of schools. Sending an email to a superintendent can work. You can get meetings. Also, sending an email to teachers can work and you can get meetings, but they can't be the same email. And the reason I say that is teachers want and need various things that are different than a superintendent would want or need. A principal cares mostly about his or her individual school building. The superintendent or the special education director or the associate director of curriculum, they all care about 5 or 10 different school buildings, and it's quite different. So really understanding who they are and then crafting messages specifically for that person at that type of organization is really important. Who here has heard of the buyer's journey? I'll rephrase. For 5,000 irrelevant bonus points that don't do you any good, who has heard of the buyer's journey?
Ooh. It's
All right, who's that? TJ.
Hey, so that's going to be how you chart from the first touch point to the buying decision from the buyer's perspective, how they interact with you and come to a decision.
That's exactly right. And while you're on the line, you get 5,000 fake bonus points. It's like kind of like Dave and Buster's coupons, you know, like you might get a teddy bear if you have 1 million of these. So bonus question, what do you think has been the biggest thing that has changed the way people buy in the last couple of decades?
The interneto.
Yes, sir. So open for questions as I go through this. If you guys have any thoughts or questions, so certainly shout them out. But the buyer's journey is what TJ just shared. It's the steps that buyers take to make a decision. And what we as sellers need to do is align our messaging and our touch points and our strategies to what the buyer wants. So I used car sales before. Are there any car or automotive businesses on this call?
There actually is, Dan.
That's right. Zach is here. Okay, Zach, this is gonna be an interesting, like, backwards question because it has nothing to do with your business per se. But do you think car salespeople would be good if they just randomly called a list of homeowners and asked them if they wanted to come in and check out a new car?
I can't imagine that would be particularly effective.
No. What do buyers typically do when they start that process? Why do you think they start the car buying process?
They have an old car, would be a big one. They see an ad on TV that they're interested in, that they'd like to upgrade.
Yeah. So they have a car and they want to upgrade. They have an old car that they're maybe concerned about. All of those things, right? Maybe they don't have a car and this is their first car.
Yeah.
Typically, the buyer has to identify a problem first. So now I realize you sell to dealerships, so it's a little different. For the rest of you on this call, if you're business to business, your prospects may not know that there is something out there that can help them. So they're just plugging along. They're using spreadsheets. They're cobbling together a bunch of disparate sources of information. They're just trying, if there's a consultant or two on this call, they're just going about their business thinking they know what's right, and maybe they have no clue there's a better way to do it. All of these reasons. Buyers in our world, we can show them that they might have a problem or a challenge. Usually, though, in consumer sales, you can't just randomly call someone or send them an email and say, hey, your car's breaking down, you should buy a new one. The thing is, once you identify this challenge, though, now the buyer starts to research and look at what's out there to help me solve this. That's where you guys get started as sales. So you may or may not be part of showing them they have a problem. you're definitely going to be part of helping them research possible solutions to these problems. That is called possibly an introductory phone call, an exploratory call, a discovery call. This is helping them understand that what you do can help them solve problems. From there, oftentimes, and this is really where the internet comes into play, they start to research other examples of businesses that can help them solve the same problem. So here's an example. You could use my company to build an entire sales team for you. If you want to have the employees in your business, we can help you recruit them. We will train them, manage them. We become a de facto management team that sits over top of your sales team to help them perform the best that they can. We can also do that with our employees, where we would go and hire people and do the exact same work for your company, and they would just be my employees. There's many alternatives out there. One of them is you could do that yourself. You could hire them and train them and coach them and manage them and give them tools yourself. That's been a long-standing professional discipline that many companies build internally. Another example is there are consultants out there that can help you go and get into 5, 10, 15 meetings that they have relationships with, and they can make introductions. That's a very valid alternative. You can also work with independent sales reps that you pay commission if they help you drive a sale, and that's it. You know, they kind of work on their own. They do other projects probably. They're selling other products, but they're gonna help you. These are all alternatives to my kind of company. But I can assure you that most of our clients are going to evaluate alternatives before they make this decision. Once they make the decision, which is step number 4, then it's very important that you help them start using the service or product that you sold them, become happy with it, tell other people about it, and hopefully buy more from you in the future. That's why we spent so much money with Miami-Dade. That's why we weren't as profitable with Miami-Dade. We spent so much money trying to make them happy that it turned out to just be a regular account for us.
Hey, Dan.
Any questions on the buyer's journey?
I've got a question similar to the Miami-Dade scenario, but actually about your ideal customer profile. Let's say you've got 2 customers, customer A, who let's just say pays you 3x what customer B does, but the sales cycle is also 3 times as long. And I guess this is more of a philosophical question here, but obviously, you know, customer A is paying you 3 times what customer B does, but that sales cycle is pretty lengthy. How would you determine, or what would your decision-making process be on an ideal customer there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me ask you.
And I guess let me also add that different from Miami-Dade, the customer acquisition cost, aside from the sales cycle, is pretty much the same. There's not a lot of expenditures that go into winning customer A. It's just that length of time. And let's say there's even less of customer A's than there are customer B's.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm going to just rapid fire throw some thoughts at you.
Sure.
Number 1 is you should be selling to both of those customers. So theoretically, if the customer that takes 3 years to close, and let's use years for argument's sake, as opposed to 1 year to close, if that customer, assuming you don't have to have meetings with them every single week for 3 years, you're right, they're making decisions so far in advance, maybe because of budgets, maybe because of they have yearly meetings that they have to attend, and they're going to next year they'll get you on the meeting agenda, so on and so forth, right? You're probably not spending an exorbitant amount of time nurturing them versus the other option, which is they're going to make a decision at the end of this year. That's part 1. So you should probably be targeting both. Part 2 is then really and this is unfortunate, right? That corporations versus startups, one of the great things about everyone on this call, I assume, is that we can pivot and change things, iterate a product, add new services pretty quickly, whereas somebody like Xerox can't and didn't, was the problem, right? So what I would suggest there is, you know, if you need revenue this month, you're going to unfortunately have to spend time on some of those prospects that you know are going to close this month. I wouldn't lose sight of targeting those that take a long time, though. You just can't have all of your eggs in that basket. So we still, TJ, targeted Miami-Dade after, as an example, after we realized that suburban schools were our ideal customer. We still went after the big schools. We just didn't pour as many resources. It wasn't only go after these. It was also go after these. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Hey, Dan,
There are so many factors.
You got some chat coming in. Are you seeing the chat window, or would you like me to man that for you as the questions come in?
You know what? Thanks for saying that. I didn't see it. It didn't pop up, but I'm looking at it now.
One thing I wanted to tag on real quick was a comment that Nora made. Thanks, Nora. Sounds like a situation in zero to IPO, a podcast. Their solution was Sarah to find a co-founder that has a sales background. Do you have any specific comments on that? You were talking about ways in which you can add that sales capacity in creative ways. To what extent do you believe that, you know, it should really be a co-founder if you fundamentally lack that versus you as a more technically minded founder or market-driven founder trying to add your capacity? It seems to be the $1 million personal question here.
Yeah. May I be candid?
Yes.
I have seen some companies succeed wonderfully with that concept. I'm going to give you an example that might not be totally true. I don't know who. I believe they both started the business together. I could be wrong though, but I'm pretty sure that Steve Jobs and Wozniak started Apple, and Steve Jobs was a sales guy. He was a marketer. That is an excellent example of technical founder and non-technical marketer. I've seen, and I'm sure there's like many other non-famous examples of successful companies that do that. Here's what I've seen though, to the contrary. I've seen, no joke, hundreds of companies in the past 5 years that bring on a sales background, a sales experienced co-founder, or that's their first key hire and they pay them a little bit of money, but they definitely have a big equity stake or whatever, you know, there's many options there. And the challenge I see there, especially if the technical co-founder is the one making is the one doing the recruitment. I'll give you an example. Carnegie Mellon is a big tech school here in Pittsburgh. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Carnegie Mellon, CMU. It's very common that someone from their engineering program, and I'm stereotyping here, but an engineer starts a business and hires somebody from the MBA program at Carnegie Mellon and says like, oh, well, I won't use Sarah, obviously, that's a bad idea. Mike just got his MBA. He's been in sales before. He's my guy. So now Mike is co-founder. Mike has like 2 years of sales experience and maybe isn't fully equipped to do the things that he's going to need to do right now and to grow the company. So it's very easy to make a bad hire in any role, whether it's programming or human resources or accounting or sales. Oftentimes, I have seen people struggle by bringing in someone they think is going to be a good salesperson. And maybe they are, but if they don't have structure and foundation built and a process, maybe they're not the best for that role. So my overall answer is it could work greatly. It could also burn very fast. So Nora, sorry, that's not a definitive answer for you, but I've seen both sides lots of times. Does lifetime value factor into ideal customer? For sure, 100%.
I guess that was an inaccurate way to kind of ask the question that I'd asked about the two different customers. When you know one will ultimately pay more, how do you make that decision? But I think I got a good answer. It's a ratio between both of them.
Yeah, my answer usually is like do all of it if possible. But I know that's not always possible. But there's actually a slide in here that'll reinforce that joke, I think.
I'll keep monitoring on your behalf, Dan. I'd say keep it flowing from here, and we can obviously reconnect afterwards and
Sounds good.
in between sessions and all that.
Perfect. Thank you. And I could certainly, email answers and all of those things too. So we've talked strategy so far. Now it's about process. And this sort of gets into, I want to use that Mike hire, right? Mike was a sales guy. Salespeople don't necessarily mean they're great sales visionaries. It doesn't mean they can build process. It doesn't mean they know the technologies they need. They have just a certain skill set that maybe they were really good at, and maybe they're just really good at interviewing and they can convince a technical founder that they're the person. Sometimes, again, that's a great hire. Sometimes it's not. And I have no skin in the game either way. We actually work with lots of sales leaders in our business. Oftentimes, though, I have seen that be a challenge. And one of the reasons is, I think, process. So the number one thing of process is to figure out how can I have more conversations throughout this entire buyer's journey? How can I increase my conversion rates through this sales cycle? And what conversion rate means is if I make X number of phone calls, I'm going to speak to X number of people. If I visit X number of hospitals, I will see X number of decision makers. It also means if I send out 10 proposals to 10 accounts, I'm going to land X number of deals. So those are conversions. And the goal of process is to do both of those things. Quantity, you want to have as many as you can. And then quality, you want those many to be good. So here's what that looks like. You got to align the goals. Going after the Miami-Dade example versus a smaller school that can convert faster is not a good idea if your investors are saying you just need users. I don't know if there's any SaaS platform owners on the call, but early stage SaaS companies typically need to build up a user base. Not always, right? But a lot of times from my experience, I've seen investors say, just get to 100,000 or 500K or 1 million users and your world is going to change. So going after the most profitable one user doesn't really help, right? You have to align the goals. You also have to align to your buyer's journey. This is a statistic that holds true almost always in business-to-business sales. It takes about 7 attempts to reach a decision maker. And that can be phone calls, emails, visits to their office, touch points at conferences, letters that you write them. It takes 7 tries to reach a decision maker. And why I'm saying this is, as early stage companies, I would imagine a lot of you are, and especially if you don't have a sales background, you're not all that into making cold calls and sending emails that never get responded to and all of those activities. But if it takes 7 times to reach someone, and the average number of times that salespeople, and I'm not talking you guys, but someone hired for sales, they give up after 2 tries. That's statistically impossible then to really build up a huge pipeline. So you have to reach out to people enough. How do you do that? Here's my joke. Phone, email, LinkedIn, conferences. Do I go to visit the customer at the office? Do I send them a white paper? Do I do all of these things? And the answer is yes. As many as you can that make sense for your buyer, you should be doing. This is all outbound effort, right? You're reaching out to them to try to start a conversation. You also might have inbound leads. These are people that go to your website. People, if you have an advertising campaign, they're coming to you by filling out forms. You guys all see this when you're on Google. If you type something in and go to a website, I bet you see that company every so often afterwards when you're searching the internet. And that's trying to drive inbound activity. So you should have a mix of the 2 of those, outbound and inbound if possible. And then the processes in general are for prospecting. So think of prospecting as before you've identified an opportunity. That could be advertising, trade shows, walking the streets. It could be sending emails, making phone calls, etc. There should be many processes for those. There should be processes for how to stay in front of your opportunities. So especially if they take 1 to 3 years, and I know that was an arbitrary number, but even 6 weeks to 3 months, what are you doing to stay in touch with those people through the process to add value so that they remember you when it's time to make a purchase? And then certainly your existing customers. Amazon is the greatest company in the world at making sure their existing customers are doing fine. An example of that, maybe not the best, but an example of that would be when you buy a pair of shoes on Amazon, you're definitely getting a message that says, would you like this belt? You're probably getting an email that says your shoes were delivered. Hey, check out this book that you looked at 6 months ago and didn't buy. Would you be interested in buying this book now? Those are examples of how they set processes for their existing customer base.
Question for you, Dan.
Yeah, I see that. The Xavier question?
Oh, yeah. So in my experience, inbound, especially early on, is often overlooked because that is sort of a pay-to-play type arena, right? A lot of times we think about digital advertising. So I'm curious, in your experience with your expertise, at what point is that a justifiable expense? Because a lot of it is test. Let's see how this works out. And it definitely takes away, whether you're looking at data analytics, it takes away from core sales processes. So when do you see that as something that is viable or useful?
Yeah, I'm 5 years old and I have $1 million plus business revenue, not income, of course, personal income. But we just wasted $4,000 last month this month in the month of July on Google ads that turned into one lead, and I can't get the girl on the phone or to respond through email. Not a ton of money, but like for us, a ton of money. And so we've not cracked the inbound process, even though we're partnered with a marketing agency that does digital advertising.
Sure.
I think, and the owner of this business agrees with me, that sales is the first step. Not always, please don't take that as an always statement, but reaching out, the cheapest thing you can do is send emails and make phone calls to try to talk to a potential buyer. That's the absolute cheapest thing you can do. That you're going to get instant feedback on your message. You're going to get instant objections that hopefully you'll learn from. You're going to have conversations that actually lead somewhere. And you're going to be learning from those steps all throughout the process. And then once you've really understood your buyer and their journey, then it might be time to start dabbling with inbound traffic. The other best way, and I very much subscribe to this, and it is free, the absolute best way to drive inbound traffic in an affordable manner is to promote content. Promote might be the wrong word because that could mean pay for. Write blog posts, write white papers, make videos. If you guys go to our website and look at our content, like our blog posts, I have a podcast where I've interviewed 50 different people. These things, doing this, right? How many people are on the call? 20, let's say. So our call to TJ was obviously really valuable in terms of getting our name out to 20 people, and it's free. Those should be the first things you do, in my opinion. And I'm a salesperson, so naturally I think that. But marketing is only good after you really understand what you're doing from a sales standpoint.
Sure.
I hope that makes sense and isn't too matter of fact.
Do you mind if I ask, so you have a significant amount of spend on driving inbound traffic. Sounds like you're still figuring out how to convert, those folks that you hit, or maybe even what that message is to drive them inbound. Do you mind if I ask how long you've been spending on a say advertising or inbound campaign? And do you plan to do it again next month with the results that you've got currently?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we've dabbled in this over time for a while, and some campaigns have been very successful. This example was a Google AdWords campaign promoting we have it's 12 weeks. I think it was set as 11 weeks before, but we have something called an EP Academy, which is designed to teach. It's sort of what we're doing here, except much more collaborative, and there's a smaller class size and much longer, so you learn a heck of a lot more stuff. But it's like a boot camp for entrepreneurs who have to be the salesperson for now. They can't go hire people. Our core business is helping companies once they're able to hire people. But we launched this boot camp about 4 months ago. And because of that, we thought, oh, you know what? We now have a product that someone could just find us online, and they could go to our website and register without ever talking to us. And maybe if we spent a couple grand, we'll get a couple registrants, right? What we found out was that we were competing with colleges and universities that were having like MBA programs and business school opportunities. And because of that, the costs were really high. Number two, a lot of people are looking, our keywords were all jacked up. People are looking for like, how do I sell my small startup? And that hit for us. And what we have is like startup sales training, which is similar, but not the same at all. So, you know, we could keep it going. What we're actually going to do is pivot over to doing two other strategies. One is LinkedIn. We know with LinkedIn, we can target specific people, and they'll probably be the right people. And number two, retargeting through Google, which is what I shared earlier. If somebody comes to your website, you can start to send them ads 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, those types of things. Make sense?
Perfect. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I talked through this earlier, and I'm not going to stay on this slide long, but when you get this slide deck, I want you to really look at this. These are all the touch points that happens during the phases of the buyer's journey. These are the names that we use for the 4 buckets of activity. Bucket 1 is pre-prospecting, so you're basically building awareness. Number 2 is prospecting. You're actively trying to get people to start having conversations with you. Number 3 is opportunities. So how are you going through the steps to qualify them and get them a demonstration of your product or service, a proposal, and closing business? And then finally, what do you do once they're customers? This is pretty generic, but it's what we live by for sure. So Sarah has this problem, right? The first thing she's going to do, and it's the first thing I did, and I bet you it's the first thing you guys did, was when you start a business, you think, okay, who do I know in this industry, or as a mentor at my university or accelerator, or in my network of friends that can introduce me to people that I want to do business with? That's like I have 5 contacts on LinkedIn and I'm going to get meetings with them because they're friends of mine, or they know me, or they know friends of mine, whatever it is. Then you say, okay, now I want to figure out in my city, how can I go and get my 20 first customers? That's really where Sarah is. At some point, now it's time to like call every school district in the country if you were Carnegie Learning, right? So those are the questions that you ask, and sort of the genesis of what happens with most startups. And the answer to a lot of these questions is technology. That's a pretty agnostic kind of broad way of solving this problem. But with technology, you can scale either a team and say like, okay, Dan's done a good job as my sales guy, and now I'm ready to hire 3 more people and have a team of 4 and split the country into quadrants and get after it. Or you could say, you know, Zach is the founder, and Zach is also the salesperson. Zach is responsible for the product. They're bringing out 2.0 in a few months, so he's doing work there. He's working with investors. He has XYZ responsibilities in addition to sales. So how does Zach spend 5 or 10 hours a week doing sales activities without, 1, losing his mind, and 2, how can he get the output and quality of maybe 12 or 13 or 14 hours of sales activities without spending more time? That might have been a weird way of saying it, but ultimately you're trying to say I have a fixed number of time and I need to do more with it when it comes to sales. So how do you do that? Here's some examples. The bullet points on these slides are names of companies, and they're things that I think you should probably Google. We're not a tech company necessarily. We're not selling any of these platforms, but we wanted to give you examples of of things we use and that we like, so that you could start the search of your own. But the first thing is like, okay, how do I get contacts to start targeting? Well, you could do what we just talked about, which is advertise and get people to come to you. Probably not the best right away. So what else is out there? Well, you can belong to databases. There's a ton of online data companies that have every CFO in the country, or all small business presidents, human resource directors of manufacturing firms. Whatever your target buyer is, there are databases that have these lists of people that you can research. That's one way. Another way is you can go onto a website. Let's say you know that, I'll use the schools for example again. If I lived in Florida and I knew Miami-Dade was my customer, I'd probably also want to call on the schools in Tampa, Florida, and Naples, and Orlando, and Jacksonville, right? So, sorry, I'm picking East Coast. So I can go to the Jacksonville School District website and start writing down on an Excel spreadsheet the names of the superintendents and principals and various other leaders that are my buyers. And I can just build a list myself. I can use LinkedIn. We talked about that, of course. And then this last thing, Never Bounce, doesn't fit in this category, but if anybody heard me say you can get a database of potential targets that you can go after, I bet some of you thought that might be really bad data and I don't want to hurt my reputation and I don't want to spam people and so on and so forth. A site called Never Bounce, and it has 600 competitors, will help you validate if those email addresses are legitimate or not, if the people still work for those companies or not, and so on and so forth. So that's something, if you're leveraging email as an outreach strategy, and especially if you do cold email, I would suggest a company like Never Bounce to help you vet your lists. Now that you have your lists, you have to figure out, like, where am I putting these things and how am I keeping track of my targets and what am I doing? I hope at some point before the 1 year mark of having your business, you will go and invest in any CRM that's out there. A CRM is customer relationship management tool. It's basically a database that keeps track of those three buckets we talked about earlier: prospects, opportunities, and clients or customers. So any CRM will do. If you're larger or you're trying to get more sophisticated, naturally, you're going to want to have the right fit for you. And you don't have to go spend a ton of money. For instance, my company is a very technical-minded sales organization. As you can imagine, I know a lot about this, all of the things on this list and then some. We use a free CRM that helps us keep track of our opportunities. I don't spend $1. We use HubSpot. It's a sales CRM, and it quite literally keeps track of our opportunities. We don't use it for marketing. We don't use it for reaching out to our prospects. There are other tools that we pay a fortune to use for those things, but our CRM in general is free. There's a lot of options that you have, but if you're currently working on a spreadsheet, that's okay. I would highly suggest at some point considering a CRM. If you're not even working on a spreadsheet and you just have a file folder and a bunch of Post-it notes all over your office, I'd strongly consider getting something, even if it's a free tool, to help you organize. I mentioned outreach. There are technologies out there. I'll keep this brief because you're probably not going to invest in a ton of them, but there are technologies out there that'll help you make hundreds of phone calls in an hour, help you leave voicemails that you don't have to say things on the voicemail. You just press a button and a recording pops up. It could be your voice too. There are tools that help you listen to calls so you can help coach sales reps. You can record various things. The things that you'll most likely use, hopefully soon, would be something like Calendly, which is a calendar app where you can say, like, hey, prospect, check out, here's a link to my calendar. Pick a 30-minute block that works for you. That will help you schedule and organize meetings very well. And also live chat, something on your website that can help you help people that are exploring your site is an excellent tool. I have a live chat on my site. If you go to our site, you'll see it. And it's never manned. And what I mean by that is no one is ever monitoring it. So it's not actually live. But believe it or not, people leave messages on it for me all the time. And I get emails that say, it's an email. It's like a form fill, right? And it says like, hey, we'd love to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. No one ever says, why isn't anybody available on your live chat? Naturally, if you're a company like Zoom or a company like Airbnb or whomever, you're going to want to know why people aren't on their live chat. But for most of us, just having it there is another way of finding leads. And then automating processes. This is the biggest thing. This saves you time. This makes you more superhuman if you have 5, 6, 7, 10 hours of sales time. Trying to figure out how can you automate certain things that you're doing all the time that aren't adding major value to your sales ability is really important. If somebody requests information on your website and fills out a form, maybe an email goes out an hour later that says, hey, Bill, hey, first name, thank you for requesting information on our site. I'd love to schedule a 10-minute quick talk to learn a little bit more about what you're looking for. Here's a link to my calendar. You don't have to ever send that email. So if you're on a golf course or you're in class or you're in a meeting, you don't have to do anything, but the activity happens. That's one example of probably 100 that salespeople and business owners use to automate certain processes. And all of these tools are going to collect data for you, meaning you will have reports and dashboards and analytics. And there's a reason why I have this. I'm going to skip to the next slide. Data and analytics. Seems like it's the exact same slide, so I'll just riff here. If you collect data and know what's happening in your sales organization, even if it's only you as the salesperson, here's the benefit of what you're going to find. I've sent 100 emails saying this message to this group of people, and I've sent is the right word. I've sent 100 emails using this different message to a similar group of people. And my open rates are better in this email. My click-through rates are better in this email. And people seem to be replying to this email more than the other one. You can eventually, maybe 100 is not enough, but you can eventually start to determine that one message resonates more than another. And as an early stage company, even myself, a 5-year-old company, we are constantly changing our pitch, our value proposition, how we put together our messaging. And you guys probably will too. You can't do that without data. You can make assumptions based on gut feeling and phone calls, right? Every time I tell someone this, they never seem excited. But when I mention this, they're always pumped up. That's a good example of testing and analyzing messaging. Another big use of data and analytics is scaling. We're going to talk a lot about this in the next session, but when it's time to go hire that first person or second or third sales rep or VP of sales or whomever, having the data available to say, okay, with one person, we were able to generate these activities, which resulted in all of this stuff. If we had 2 people, we probably would double it. And here's why I'm comfortable saying that. And if we had 4 people, here's what I think would happen. That's one great way of scaling. You don't want to scale until you're sure that what you're doing is replicable. The third thing is investors. I don't know if everyone here is working with any sort of investment group. I am self-funded, which my wife really loved in the first 2 years, but we're bootstrapped basically. We don't have an investment firm working with us, but if we did, and if you do, you're going to want to be able to share data that says some really helpful stuff to get their money. I see a lot of times entrepreneurs telling a VC firm or whomever it might be that my goal is to get 0.5% of the addressable market. The addressable market is X amount of dollars. Here's the problem we're solving. And I'd love for you to give me $200,000 to go make this happen. And that it's not in its entirety, but that's sort of the gist of it, right? And what we've seen a lot of times is that the investor, the person sitting in the room, is thinking, you know, I saw this same group of metrics in the last session. The addressable market is this amount of money, and I want to get 0.5%. And the real question, I think, for the skeptical investors is like, how are you going to do that? 0.5% is just an arbitrary number that business owners want, right? I want to go from $1.2 million this year, although COVID sort of hurt this, but by next year, I want to be a $3 million company. That's an arbitrary goal. What do I need to put in place to make that happen? And having data and analytics tied to your sales is the thing that will make that happen. Being able to know how to scale is how that happens. As entrepreneurs, who I assume most of you are the salesperson for your business, my number one suggestion of all of this session is to start collecting and recording all of your information. It's called a sales playbook, but it's things like, here's our messaging, here's our value proposition, here's our ideal customer profile. There might be 3 or 4 or 5 ideal customer profiles. Here's their buyer's journey. Here's what happens for a teacher to make a decision, or for a surgeon to make a decision, or a car dealership to make a decision. And then also start recording what your data is. Even if it's anecdotal, start recording, because the time you get when it's time to scale, you're going to have to do this now with somebody else. And it's not going to be your brain and your memory and your experience. You're going to have to transfer this information to somebody else and teach them how to do it. And that becomes very daunting for a lot of technical entrepreneurs. I've literally heard engineers tell a new sales rep, well, just do what I did. And I give the sales rep a lot of credit because it was his second day on the job. And he did it very politely, but he said, well, sir, I'm not an engineer. I can't do what you did. And the engineer sat there and was like, oh, that's true. You don't have 25 years experience in this. And yeah, we need to get it to be different for you, right? We need to let you be successful. It's all through recording your data and analytics and all of the other things I've talked about. Part of that sales playbook has to also be that and I mentioned this earlier, but these messages are resonating, these are not, that kind of stuff. This last slide talks quite literally about best practices in sales. So when you think of sales training, this is one of those things. Being able to deliver your value prop in a concise and compelling manner, listening to the buyers, or even people that are telling you they're not interested, listening to them and asking more questions, open-ended questions, followed by an occasional closed-ended question for clarity. These things are really important to start learning about what the customer thinks and is believing in your product. Even if they're not a good fit, I would suggest spending 5-10 more minutes, if possible, picking their brain as to why. You'll learn a lot in the early stages of how to reposition your message, or even change your product slightly to make it so that it would be beneficial. This also talks, quite a bit about product market fit and customer exploration that you guys may have heard about, where you're going out and interviewing potential customers before you're even ready to sell. It's all about learning what they need, what their challenges are, and how you can help them. I think a lot of you, if you're like me, will suffer from time management. My major suggestion when it comes to time management, when it's a full-time sales rep, it's a lot easier, right? Because you have 40, 50 hours a week to play with. When you're a busy entrepreneur, or you're responsible for sales and marketing and customer service, you have to block and tackle your time so that it's effective. My suggestion would be to figure out processes and technologies that can help you do a little bit more each day. Even if you're not spending more time, you're able to do more output. And that can be done by prioritizing your different buckets of contacts. So my prospects are going to get a call and an email every week and a half. Opportunities, I need to stay on them like crazy because I've already talked to them and they've shown interest and they are very important to me. Customers, obviously we've all heard that it's easier or it's harder to get a customer than it is to keep one. So you need to really pay attention to them. Time management matters. How do you reach out to these folks? What's the message? What are your strategies? Those vary, but making sure that you're, simply put, I imagine a lot of people on this call are like every other business owner in the world, where you might have a few customers and you're focused really on them and you're not prospecting and cold calling and sending emails. And that's okay, right? Because that's uncomfortable, but that's the only way you're going to go get new business. So doing a little bit of all of these is really important. And then finally, one of the best things that we can share about true sales training when it comes to the fundamentals of how to be a salesperson is start speaking in third-party stories. And what that simply means is when a customer says to you, how do you work with a company my size? Or do you have any experience selling to manufacturing organizations? Or how can you help us? Instead of saying, yeah, we have these features that will help you. The best way to do it is actually tell a story of someone else you've helped that has a similar challenge. So great question, Bill. That actually reminds me of something that one of our clients asked me before. We're already working with a manufacturing organization, and they do advanced prototyping for other organizations. And one of the things they were most concerned about before we started working together was X, Y, and Z. And over the past 6 months since we've been partnered together, we've found that blah, blah, blah. And you're basically telling stories to communicate the point you're trying to make, as opposed to just making the point. People love hearing about other customers and their happiness, maybe challenges you've seen with other customers. Being honest is important, but using feedback from other people tends to get people's attention more than telling your side of the story. The way I'll end this, I think you're always supposed to talk about politics in a group of people you don't know. I'm not going to talk politics, but I will say that all politicians tend to be really good at telling stories about other people. So when you say, like, how are you going to bring jobs back to New Mexico? And I tell you a story of meeting little Billy at a rally, and he had, some illness that was hard to cure. And I was talking to Billy. I don't know if this makes any sense to anybody, but politicians always tell stories. And you're sitting there listening and eating it up. And then afterwards, you're like, wait a minute, what was that guy's point? And the point was you were totally enthralled in what they were saying, and you bought into it. So using other people's stories and other customers' stories while you're selling is one of the best ways to do that. How to get those stories? Get testimonials from your customers. That's the best way I can tell you to do that. Okay, sort of an abrupt ending. I didn't realize that was the last slide, but bam, there we are. All right, so we've got the chat still up. You guys can start talking at will. I can go back to some slides. We have about 14 minutes left. I can go back slides if you'd like to see more, or we can get into some questions or thoughts or challenges you're facing, whatever it might be. The last thing I will ask before we end the call in 10 or 12 minutes, whatever it is something that you can take away and actually start getting after this afternoon or tomorrow. I would love to hear that. And that will be turned into a third-party story the next time I'm talking to somebody like TJ.
Won't it ever? And I think you did a good job, Dan. Like when Xavier asked about inbound sales, and you're like, we blew 4,000 last month. I really appreciated that, the candid speak there. So good on you for modeling the behavior you're recommending here. Yeah, let's open it up. You can unmute your mic, or you could tap in chat if you wanted to. Probably be easier to, we have few enough people that we can just do video and raise hands, or you can, use the little reactions button to, give me a thumbs up or a clap. I don't think we have a hand raise here, but yeah, questions. We got Dan here for another 10 or so minutes.
I'll start. Apparently in my head is a glowing icon, so I will be a glowing icon. Hey, Dan, thank you so much. This is the other Dan, your tocayo, as we would say in New Mexico. Your namesake.
Guy with the same name, yep.
And quick question. We were having an interesting conversation about, these automation tools, right? Like Calendary and Mixmatch and other tools to, to really maximize your time. But, one of the things that I love those tools. I love automation, but I've had collisions, and part of it's messaging, part of it's individual personalities, but it's dehumanizing the transaction. So, that's my word that I've chosen, but that's my understanding from the stakeholders of using some of these tools is that, they want to be a little bit more nurtured, right? Rather than like, hey, you fill out my calendar. This is bigger than just the calendar tool, but I see that happen with these automation tools. And so I was wondering if you've had any stories or experiences about how do we use these automation tools without kind of dehumanizing or the transaction in the relationship, and like what's that balance between high touch, low touch?
Yeah. So for sake of time, I'm not going to ask Tyler to talk this through. But he could. And if you guys all get a chance to meet at some point, given his location, he's very good at this. I'm going to give you an example and not use Mixmax or Calendly, but I'm going to talk about email, okay? With email prospecting, and this is the type of email where you're trying to get somebody to either reply back to you or take the next call that you send their way or respond to a letter that you sent them, whatever it is. There is a rule of thumb that there's two questions, right? Do I make a template and send this template to that person? Or do I write them a personal email and give them like researched time and effort that I really want to talk? So Dan Heron, I want to talk to you. I'm researching you on LinkedIn. I'm looking at your background. I see your company, et cetera, et cetera. The data shows that 20% personalization. So a couple sentences talking about your background, LinkedIn, your job before this, whatever. That talking about, your existing organization now, and I read your board notes, blah, blah, blah. 20% is the most effective use of personalization in outbound email. Too much personalization doesn't drive any more value and wastes your time. Too little personalization makes it look like what you were just saying, which is impersonal, canned, etc. So you have to have that fine balance. Tyler mentioned at the beginning of the call the name PEX. We named it PEX because it means personal email cadence, PEC. And it quite literally is, our first outbound email to a prospect, our reps will go on to their LinkedIn, go onto their website, read articles that they wrote, things they liked on LinkedIn, whatever, and they'll write a couple sentences. And the rest of the email was already written by me like 6 months ago for that job title at that kind of organization. So it's still customized, right? It's still, even paragraph 3 is like, oh, this is written for an owner of a marketing firm. Okay, yeah, that's me. But the first couple sentences, Tyler actually wrote, hey, I love that logo on your website. The team picture when you guys were at Disney World last year looked so much fun. And then the rest is templated. That's what we've found. So to get back to Mixmax and Calendly and stuff, I think people, are getting used to certain tech tools, especially with COVID-19, that if done properly and you write a nice personal message and say like, hey, Bill, you're probably super busy like we are. Find a time that works on your calendar, and here's a list of all of my open times, and then a link to Calendly. I don't find that to be impersonal. I think it's a mixture. A mixture of personal and automation is okay.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing for my learnings has been, again, crafting that personalized 1 or 2 lines, and then introducing, like you said, the automation or the template. So I think it's dead on. Thank you so much for sharing.
But another real talk example, I used a tool called Streak, STREAK, to send many of you an email about this session. It allows me to it sends as me in Gmail. It's not an email list, but it automates within Gmail. I can, for example, I have ABQID fund portfolio companies, and I can send y'all an email, and I can tokenize your first name and stuff like that. I'd be, in the chat or whatever. There's times I don't use that, and there's times I do, right? But for this, I believed this would be potentially beneficial to every portfolio company. So I sent it along to you all. That's it. For me, a good use. I do think there's a balance. Like, should I get on a call with this person rather than send an email, let alone an automated email? And there's always that kind of ask yourself before you send type mentality. But I in this conversation, Zach with Nimble, we've talked about this a lot. For you all, based in New Mexico, needing to punch above your weight, I would err on the side of getting out there more than the side of being fearful that you're a squeaky wheel or too forward or anything like that, especially if you have awesome products, which many of you do, all of you do, actually. You know what I mean? So that's the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
A good takeaway for me was that 20% personalization piece. Heard that before, know it. I am a power user in HubSpot. I like to write a lot of good emails, put them into sequences like you that are written months ago. But what I like before launching that sequence is it shows you all those emails, and you have the opportunity to drop in some personalization there. I usually use name, company name, and I'm like, they know this was personalized. But again, in thinking with my volume mind, that's what I do. But that's a huge opportunity when it stops you and shows you all the emails to do some quick research and drop a bit more personalization in there. So thanks for that.
The best meeting.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please go. No, Valerie, you're up.
What everybody's using as your CRM system, or what your favorite CRM system is. We originally started with HubSpot, switched to Salesforce, and I'm kind of struggling with Salesforce. So I'm just wondering what everybody else is using so that I can decide what we want to do moving forward.
I've been on HubSpot, put a lot of people on HubSpot. I've used Salesforce at enterprise organizations, and that's really good because it speaks to if you're using a lot of other products that you need to tie in, pushing and pulling data. I think that's where Salesforce is useful. But if you're using it for purely a database, my experience is it's overkill, and your users, your sales team isn't going to use it because there's just too many fields and too much to click in there. HubSpot, I think, is really dumbed down to a point where everything you need is there and nothing you don't isn't, in my opinion.
Okay, because that's what I do with Salesforce is I feel like I need a PhD just in Salesforce to get
There's a whole career built around using it, a Salesforce architect.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
This entire concept of us teaching programming at incubators, we've done it all over the country. And we were in a session, my partner Sam, who you saw his photo briefly, just had a baby. He and I were sitting in a session at a big incubator in Pittsburgh. And somebody raised her hand in the back and said, I just started my business like 3 months ago. I don't have a CRM yet. We were not teaching. We were sitting in the audience. It was a VP of sales at a pretty big cybersecurity company in Pittsburgh that was doing a presentation. We were there to watch. She said, I just started 3 months in, blah, 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 don't have a CRM. What do you suggest I do? He looked at her and said, Salesforce, and then said, anyone else have questions? And I stood up. If you're looking at the camera, you'll see. I was like standing up, and Sam grabbed me by the collar and pulled me down. And I wanted to kill the man because completely irresponsible. There are 25 questions that need asked before you can tell somebody what CRM to choose. And even then, it's still a shot in the dark. With that said, Valerie, there's a site you should look at called G2, the letter G, the number 2.com.
Okay.
It used to be called G2crowd.com. I don't know if it's changed. I think it's just G2. It has like, I think probably 80% of all of the tools that you might be able to look at. And then you can do comparisons and buyer feedback and all of that stuff. And then it's still going to be a guess for you because there's so many tools out there. And I do agree that Salesforce is such a huge tool and it can be the best thing in the world for you. It can also be overkill.
Right.
It's just my opinion.
What do you personally use?
Well, so we use a platform called Sales Loft, L-O-F-T. We use HubSpot. We have used Salesforce. We've used a platform called Agile CRM. We use Zoho. Kind of all of them. And our clients are mixed and matched all over the place. So we probably have logins to like a dozen different CRMs. Pipedrive is a big one these days with smaller companies. It really depends on like what you're using it for. We don't use the same tool for every client that we work with.
Okay.
SalesLoft is great for inside sales teams. I've used that in the past because you can make sure that guys have sequences going, dials in there, calls recorded. That one's really great if you guys have got a lot of people on the floor there, Valerie.
Okay. What was that one called? I'm sorry.
SalesLoft.
Sales Loft. Okay.
Or InsideSales.com also has one that's really similar called Playbooks, but it's more, you can create a cadence and really monitor what your guys' days look like. And measurement is really big in that one. I'd be happy to chat with you after also if you want to.
Awesome. That would be great. Thank you.
I've got a question for you, Dan. As you are, looking to bring on what might be that crucial next salesperson, and this is another philosophical one. Do you prefer someone that has experience and, good habits, bad habits along with that? Or do you prefer someone with no experience where you can really replicate yourself there? And second part, how'd you find Tyler? Because I'm in Albuquerque looking for salespeople.
There you go. Well, I can certainly recommend him. If he leaves Engaged Prospect, he's yours. But let's let him finish school too, okay? I found him on Indeed. The answer to your first question is it all depends. It certainly matters what you're selling, right? And I'm going to give you an answer that you didn't ask, but I get a lot of times industry expertise or sales expertise, and which one can you like coach and morph easier, right? And same thing, depends on what you're selling, but I'll give you a couple examples. I've hired someone that has zero experience. My job before education technology sales was recruiting students to an art school in Pittsburgh. So I was a recruiter, but an admissions guy. And we'd hire people, like some people that were hardcore sales dudes, and we'd have to teach them what the heck the school did. Then we'd hire a guy that went to the school and is a photographer. He knows everything about the programs. In fact, he knows the instructors. So when he's on a tour, he can be like, Xavier, let me introduce you to Bill. He's awesome, blah, blah, blah. But he knew nothing about sales. And it matters what your infrastructure is like. I could care less if I hire someone that has no sales background. I could teach them that pretty quickly. It's harder for me to coach bad habits out than it is to teach good habits. But if you don't have time and resources to spend on coaching, and I don't mean training, but I mean listening to calls, riding along on meetings, shadowing. If you don't do those things, then you better have somebody that's done it before. And there's, not an answer, I realize, but that's how I would look at that question.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey, I gotta pop in and just respect everybody's time. It's 12:33, so I'm gonna cut it short here. There's plenty of room for follow-up. That's one of the reasons we scheduled the second one here in this series for August 13th. And I think that question actually encroaches a little bit into topics there. The Eventbrite page is up on that one, so if you want to see where that's going to differ from what Dan covered in today's session, do it. But I just recommend you sign up because this was, in my opinion, really fantastic. Dan, thank you again for your time. Good stuff you're doing with Engage Prospect. And just a few announcements. Let's see, Dan posted the links. We are doing weekly startup office hours. It's Friday mornings. It is virtual, but it's fun virtual, not Zoom fatigue virtual. We curate mentors from legal to finance to marketing to sales, and we curate startups for our mentors to meet with, because mentors are looking for investments, they're looking for startups to help. And we take that job really seriously, the curation. So we've worked on this for past couple months before opening it up to really any startups in New Mexico. But so if you or anybody you know is seeking some advice from some experts, get with Dan, look at that Eventbrite link and sign up. I will be here this Friday if you want to catch up on your startup, any needs you have. I tend to be a nodder and then a connector to resources with maybe a few tidbits of sage wisdom here and there, but lots of great experts that come. David King on the finance side, Kevin Souls on intellectual property. So good crew. And then, yeah, August 13th, we'll see you there. If you're not subscribed to the ABQID newsletter, do that. If you, we posted Dan Hirsch's contact info if you got those follow-up questions for him. And as you've seen by now, he's a really open, transparent type of guy. And we, again, appreciate you for that, Dan. Hey, thanks everybody. This was great. See you August 13th. And we are doing, the last thing I should mention, sorry, I'm going a little bit long, but we are doing a startup retool series. In August, we're going to be, I think August, September, one of those, we're going to be switching to a monthly format, but got some really great sessions, and you can also access past sessions talking about sales, talking about marketing and the like, how to tell your story as a startup at activatenm.com. Those are recorded. So lots of content for you. I'm always available. I know Dan Heron's always available for you. Somos unidos. Vamos a hacerlo juntos here in New Mexico, and we'll catch you on the flip side, everybody. Have a great day. Do your best work of your lives and build your startup. We're here to help.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Bye, guys. Pleasure.